Hi, it's Steve from PartSelect. Today we're going to show you how to change the fan motor grommet on your refrigerator. If you're changing it on the condenser fan, you'll need a 1/4" nut driver and a 5/16" nut driver. If you're changing it on the evaporator fan motor, you'll also need a Phillips screwdriver, a small flat blade screwdriver, and a pair of needle-nose pliers. Let me show you how we do it. Now before we begin this repair, the first thing that we'll need to do is to pull the refrigerator out and disconnect the power. Simply pull the plug from the receptacle. Now with the back cover removed, we have access to the condenser fan motor. So to change either the front or rear grommet, we're going to have to remove one of the two 5/16" screws that secure that rear bracket to the front bracket and loosen the other one. Now we'll start by removing 5/16" screw on the inside of that motor bracket. Just take that out and remove it. And then we'll just loosen the one on the outer edge. And while holding the motor in place, we can pivot that rear bracket down and out of the way. To replace the rear grommet, we're simply going to peel it off of the back of the motor, or it may have still been engaged in the back of the bracket. Simply pop it out and discard it. Take the new one, fit it into place, align the motor with the grommet, and then we'll reinstall the two screws. Now with the rear bracket tilted down and out of the way, if you're replacing the front one, we'll simply grasp that motor. We're going to pull that right through the back. You'll need to pop the fan blade off. It will probably come off on its own if you just pull straight back on that motor shaft. That'll expose the front grommet. Simply slide it off the face of the motor and pop the new one into place. If the grommet stayed in the front bracket, you're simply going to pop that out of there and insert the new one into place. Then we're going to reinstall the motor. We'll line that shaft up with the fan blade, putting it through the grommet first. Lift the blade up into position. We'll get started on there. Once we have the motor pushed into the grommet, we're going to line up the fan blade, push it onto the shaft, just till it's flush with the back side of the blade. We'll ensure that our rear grommet is in position. We'll tilt that up, insert the back side of that motor into that grommet, and then tighten up the two screws. All right, now that we have the assembly secured again, we're ready to put the back panel on. And we'll also show you how to replace that grommet on the evaporator fan motor. Now our first step will be to open the freezer door, remove any items that are in the freezer, including on the ice cube tray. And then we're going to remove that holder for the ice cube trays. And to remove it, we'll need to lift it up enough to push it fully to the left to insert the two pins on the end of that shelf as far in as they'll go. And then we're going to bend it slightly to disengage it from a couple of T-pins on the top. Now we'll want to make sure that that's warm enough that it will bend easily. If it's frozen, you may run the risk of breaking it. So simply push it over far enough to clear those pins. And then you can lift it out and we'll set that aside. Next we're going to remove two Phillips screws that hold the evaporator fan cover in place. can lift up on that fan cover and then tilt it away at the top. Gently lift it off of the styrofoam block that is beneath it. We'll set that aside. Next, we're going to remove 2 Phillips screws from the front of the freezer floor. These screws are slightly longer than the 2 that held the evaporator fan cover in, just so you can distinguish between them. Now we'll get hold of a corner of that floor and tilt it up on the front. We need to disengage some hooks that fasten to the back of the evaporator cover. And then slide that out, set it aside. There's the 4 hooks that hook into the back of the evaporator cover. Now we're going to remove this styrofoam block. And take caution when pulling that up out of there. It just fits into the floor of the freezer as a friction fit. We'll set that aside. We'll now remove 2 Phillips screws from the upper corners. And then 2 1/4-inch hex head screws that secure the evaporator cover to the fan motor bracket. Now you can lift that evaporator cover out of the way and set that aside. Now with the evaporator cover off, we have access to the components. So our next step will be to disconnect the fan motor, depress the 2 locking tabs on the side of the wire connector, and disengage that. And with our needle nose pliers, we're going to remove the ground wire from the end of the evaporator mounting bracket. And then we'll remove 2 Phillips screws that hold that bracket to the back wall. You need to support that motor assembly when you're taking the last screw out. And now we can take the assembly and set it on a suitable work surface and complete our repair. Now that we have the motor assembly on a suitable work surface, our next step will be to remove the fan blade and the little retaining clamp. Now, if the blade will not pull easily off of the shaft, you may need to remove that little retaining clamp first, and just with a flat blade screwdriver, just catch the edge of it and gently pry it off of the fan blade. Most cases, the blade and that clamp will come off as one piece. Again, if it's a little snug, just take a pair of pliers and go in underneath the center of the hub of that fan blade and gently pry it off the motor shaft. Now once you have that removed, you have easier access to the 5/16 hex head screws on either side of that motor. Remove those. And you can actually just remove one and loosen the other one enough that the motor will slide freely in there. But for clarification purposes here, we're going to remove it completely. As well as the ground wire. Then we'll lift the front motor bracket off. That exposes one of the grommets. Simply press it out of the bracket and install a new one on the back side, and it's ready to reassemble. You should also check the rear one. Again, that just pops out, and the new one would slide into place. Then we're simply going to set the motor back in position with the button on the back of the motor fitting into that center hole in the grommet. We'll set the front motor bracket in place, and then we'll replace the mounting screws. Make sure they're tight. And if you've removed the clamp from the fan blade, we should put that back on first. It's a little tight, so just catch it over 1/3 of that center hub on the fan blade. And then with a pair of needle nose pliers, just expand it enough to slide over the remainder. And then make sure that it's pressed firmly onto the hub of that fan blade so that it bottoms out on the little shoulder on the bottom. Next, we'll slide that onto the motor shaft, and we want to leave about 1/4 to 5/16 of an inch of the shaft protruding from the hub of that blade. And now we're ready to reinstall the assembly. Now, to reinstall the motor assembly, we'll take one of those Phillips screws and have that ready. We'll put one of the mounting screws in place, install the other one. Make sure that when you mount that you don't pinch the wire that goes to the defrost thermostat. We'll next connect the harness to the motor. Make sure the locking tabs engage. And reinstall the ground wire to the terminal on the mounting bracket. Next, we'll take the evaporator cover, slide that into position, and we'll secure it with the 2 1/4-inch hex head screws that hold it to the motor bracket. Then we'll replace the 2 screws in the upper corners. Next, we'll reinstall the styrofoam block. And again, take caution when inserting that into the opening. Now we can put the freezer floor back in. Make sure those 4 tabs engage the evaporator cover. They tuck in behind the cover, and then the lip of the floor will be across the front. And we'll put the 2 longer Phillips screws into the front of the freezer floor. We'll install the fan cover. Slide that down over the styrofoam block. And lift it up enough to engage the 2 hooks at the top of that cover. They hook it into the evaporator cover. Slide it down into place, make sure it's engaged at the top. And the 2 screws for the tabs fit into the freezer floor. We'll secure those with the 2 remaining screws. Next, we'll put the shelf in for the ice cube trays. These two pins need to go into the upper portion of that slotted hole so that it allows the shelf to go tight up against the wall. We will hook 2 slots in the top into the T-pins. And we can pull those 2 pins out and set them down into the bottom of those slotted holes. Now we're ready to load the freezer back up. Plug the refrigerator in, and our repair is complete. Told you it was an easy job. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your repair.